And we start with breaking news this hour from Istambul in Turkey, where the country's interior minister says there have been 2 deadly explosions. One occurred outside a football stadium and is believed to have been caused by a car bomb, and a second was reportedly triggered by a suicide bomber in a park nearby. The latest reports say that 13 people have been killed and 40 others injured. One of the blasts was caught on camera.
Patladı ha şurası. Vallahi patladı. Yemin ediyorum patladı.
The Turkish president has issued a statement saying the attacks were aimed at both police officers and civilians and aimed to maximize the number of casualties. The blasts happened after a football match at the stadium between 2 of the country's top teams. Turkey's transport minister has described them as planned terrorist acts. However, no one has yet claimed responsibility. Local coverage of the incident has been banned by the Turkish authorities. Loud bangs and gunfire were also reportedly heard shortly after the explosions occurred. The sound was so loud that it sent local TV reporters running for cover.
O işin doğası olacak yani. Biz bile yan yana olduğumuz için bizle bile oluyor. Bitiyor. El sallıyoruz. Su isteyen olursa su veriyoruz.
Independent journalist and stringer Alaaddin Kilic is in Turkey with the latest.
The first information that we had was that this attack targeted the police bus when they were leaving from the stadium after the match. And we also know that there have been no casualties from the football fans, and all the injuries are from the police side. Generally, there are 2 popular suspects of terrorist attacks in Turkey. One of them is the PKK, the Kurdish terrorist organization, and the other one is ISIL. The previous terrorist attacks in the country, no one rushed forward to claim responsibility of the attack, and this is what we are having at the moment.
All right, let's now cross live to Max Abrams, a terrorism expert at Northeastern University in Boston, to get his thoughts on this subject. Max, thanks for being with us here. Again, it seems you and I are always talking under these circumstances, but so no one has claimed responsibility as of yet, and usually that is something that people are quick to claim responsibility for, specifically in Turkey. Who is likely to have been behind these attacks, given that one explosion was reportedly caused by a suicide bomber? Is that a hallmark of a specific group, ISIL perhaps?
Sure. So I've done a lot of original research on credit claiming. That is, when do terrorist groups claim credit for attacks? And one of my main findings is that it really depends on the target selection. When civilians are killed, what I found is that terrorist groups are generally more reluctant to claim credit. In this case, it seems as if the attack was not indiscriminate because police officers, my understanding, were the targets, and they're the ones who were killed and the other ones wounded. And so these are precisely the kinds of targets that terrorist groups tend to be quick to claim credit for. And so my prediction would be that we will hear a credit claim, relatively soon, within the next week. They're not necessarily automatic. There are differences in target selection between Islamic State and the PKK, the Kurdish group. In general, the PKK doesn't like to make indiscriminate attacks, doesn't like to just blow up any civilian. Their target selection is much more selective. And so the fact that police officers seem to have been targeted, that's certainly consistent with the PKK. We can't rule out Islamic State, but for example, if the attack were a wedding, and just like any civilian were killed, in such a case, I would say it's most likely Islamic State is behind it. But the fact that it was cops, that's actually consistent with the targeting of both kinds of groups, probably even more consistent with the target selection of the PKK.
Let's take a look at those tactics, if you will, specifically. I mean, the situation in Turkey and who they are fighting on any given day is a pretty complex situation given their location and in the larger region as a whole and the conflicts there. But why are Turkish law enforcement officers increasingly being targeted in such attacks, in your opinion? I mean, it does seem like it is a concerted effort towards the police.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that the Turkish government has many different enemies. The Turkish government is essentially at war, both with Islamic State as well as Kurdish separatist fighters. And so that's why whenever there's an attack in Turkey, we have to think very carefully about who is the likely culprit. I mean, you're right. There is a lot of violence there in terms of terrorism. I don't know that there's a particular uptick over the past month, for example. I've seen reports from Turkish cab drivers on the ground, for example, saying that there was a bit of a respite, and so they were actually surprised that there wasn't more terrorism. And so when this attack happened, it sort of went along with the general trend that we've seen all year. Istanbul, the site of this latest attack, has been targeted at least 3 other times. Including the airport, the Ataturk attack over this past summer, which killed 47 people, and that was Islamic State. So I mean, in terms of counterterrorism, the Turkish government is in a very, very tough situation. And one of the reasons why it's in such a tough situation is because more and more the Turks are helping out against Islamic State. In terms of helping out our mission in terms of taking over Raqqa. But in doing so, that's upsetting the Kurds, especially a group known as the YPG. And so basically, Turkish activities in Syria are alienating both Islamic State as well as the YPG, which in Turkey, they're basically called the PKK.
Max.
And so I anticipate more violence against Turkey as it continues to alienate both Islamic State as well as the Kurdish fighters.
Now, Max, real quick, Turkey has come under a lot of criticism. Erdogan cracking down on specific powers, specifically with the media. Turkish officials have now actually forbidden any coverage of these attacks in the media. Why would the government be reacting in this way? Why wouldn't they want their people to have as much information as possible to stay safe?
Because Turkey is not a democracy. Erdogan is a very authoritarian leader. The more power that he's able to get, the better. So this, he has been trying to soak up as much power for as long as he's been in office. And attacks like these actually help him because he can say, look, in the interest of protecting the population, you need an even stronger executive. And so these attacks, in some ways, are actually politically beneficial in terms of his shoring up his power and becoming an even more authoritarian leader.
All right, Max Abrams, very interesting to hear your thoughts. Terrorism expert at Northeastern University in Boston, thanks for being with us here on RT. It's always interesting to get your insight when these situations arise.
Sure.